It's being reported that France will begin removing its troops from Niger this week after being kicked out following the military coup July 26. Let's get into it. But before we do, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share. Now let's dive right in. So it's being reported that the French will begin removing their troops from Niger this week after a months-long standoff and France finally blinking first and pulling its ambassador out of Niger and stating that the troops would be gone by the end of the year. Let's watch this report and I'll come back for my commentary.
A disengagement operation. That's how the French army is describing the withdrawal of its forces from Niger. The military headquarters says the pullout of some 1,400 soldiers and personnel will begin this week. Niger's military junta called for the move after seizing power in a coup in July. For more on this story, Paul Melly joins us from London, consulting fellow of the Africa program at Chatham House. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us. Thank you. How will this withdrawal take place? Do we have any information on that?
Well, some details have been emerging this week. We're likely to see the withdrawal, first of all, of several hundred French troops who are stationed in bases just south of Niger's border with Mali, in the zone which is most affected by jihadist terrorist activity that's seen the most violence over recent years, and where the French were working with the Nigerian army, and at one stage also there were some other European special forces there.
So I wanted to stop here and just recap what they've said so far. So the French will be removing their troops, about 1,400 apparently, in the country right now, starting with the areas allegedly hardest hit by the jihadists. According to this report, they are removing their troops from the areas hardest hit, where they claim that the French was working with the Niger military as well as some other European military.
As part of an effort, if you like, to try and stop the jihadist terrorism expanding in that area, spilling over the border from Mali. So those troops are going to get pulled back, first of all, to Niamey, the Niger capital. And as soon as they're there, they will then be flown out to France. Much more complicated and likely to take most of the rest of this year. Will be moving the big heavy equipment at the main French base in Niamey, and the troops managing that. And that can't all be flown out. A lot of that will have to come by land.
So again, I want to stop and just address what's been said. The man said the troops that are in the hardest hit areas, meaning the areas where the terrorists are most active and where the troops are most active, they are pulling those back first. They will be headed to Niamey, and then they will be moving on out to France. It is the bulk of the troops, or the core base of the troops who are stationed in Niamey, who will be there for a longer period of time and who will be responsible for packing things down. And those are the ones they're saying will be there for the better part of the rest of this year, which is about 3 months.
So I understand that France is clear. Niger wants France out. The message is, loud and clear politically, militarily. But the security situation in the Sahel and the region hasn't changed really, right? So with the departure of these French troops, how is that going to change the security landscape in the region?
I wanted to stop here just to take notice of the fact that this reporter is aware that the situation is bad, has been bad, and is not stable. It hasn't been stable. So she's wondering what's going to happen to the region when the French leave. Let's listen to this man's response.
Well, it's going to pose a really huge test for the military junta which took power in Niger in late July, displacing the elected president. Because if you look at the statistics, actually for violence, for terrorism in the Sahel over the last year or two, Niger had actually been doing rather well, and not just because of the presence of the French troops. There's also backup from US intelligence, but also the Niger military had been pretty effective, and they were working very closely with these international partners, and the levels of violence and the levels of death were much lower than in neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali.
This part is so interesting. He acknowledges that Niger had been doing much better in the last couple of years, and not necessarily because of the French only, but because of the other international troops that were there, including the U.S., and because of Niger's troops' own efforts in the region. But then he goes on to state that as soon as the French leave, everything falls apart, pretty much. Listen to what he says.
Once the French troops leave, that will reduce the amount of troops available, and obviously reduce, with the removal of some of the French technical capacity, the Mirage jets, for example, reduce the sort of ability to strike back at the armed groups. But there's also a political effect of the current crisis, which is that some military units have been pulled back to Niamey because the junta there is worried that ECOWAS, the West African bloc, might try to intervene, as it's warned, to restore civilian democratic rule. And so the security position that had been so successful is become much, much more fragile. We've seen a lot of attacks in the last 2 months. And this week alone, a horrendous attack in which up to 60 soldiers may have been killed, at least 29, possibly as many as 60 troops in an attack on a Nigerian army unit. And the junta hasn't yet set out how it's going to seek to tackle that, because the deposed president, Mohamed Bazoum, had a long-term strategy, if you like, for how he was trying to tackle the security situation.
So again, this Mr. Paul Melly that seems to suggest France's presence in the area is somehow absolutely necessary, or things fall apart, and because the so-called military junta has not revealed to France its military strategy or what they plan to do in their country to fight terrorists, that France did not help them oust. In all the years that they had been there, France did not help them. Even the reporter acknowledged that, although this man seemed to want to paint another picture, the French haven't done anything to help these people. And somehow he's suggesting that there's a problem, and because the ousted president had a plan that they could see and understand, meaning the French and the Western world. But now, as they've been booted out, they're confused because what are they going to do? And considering the French didn't really do much to help them, this circular gaslighting conversation that there's a particular breed of commentator, these older European men, or these European men, they all get on code. They get on code. Now, I don't know anything about the background of this Mr. Paul Melly, but his commentary is really in line with my previous video talking about the ex-French intelligence officer who talked about the fact that now France has to get out. They may have an opportunity to go about a clandestine way of destabilizing the region. And there have been plenty of reports, seemingly credible reports across the last couple years, at least, that or some indicators or people in the region have indicated that it is France who is helping and not working to get rid of the terrorists or the problem in the region. And then you have ex-intelligence officers coming out and stating that they have now an opportunity to destabilize the region. And then this gentleman has come to state that now that France is getting out, they don't understand the way forward because the so-called junta has not been clear on their movement, as if they have to tell Europe what they're doing.
But we haven't really seen the Niger junta set out its own plans. It says it's got help from allies, but as far as one can see, those are small deployments of troops from Burkina Faso, and perhaps the promise of help from Mali. But those two countries themselves also have huge security problems to deal with.
So you guys heard that report. I find it so interesting that these men, they always have such insight into the problems. They know the statistical data. They've studied the inner workings of all parties, the jihadists, the Nigerians, the French, all sides of it. They have it all. So they can predict the future, often with clear certainty. It's so interesting. Towards the end there, he mentions Niger's potential partners. So there again, they're focused on the Russian influence and the Chinese influence on the continent in general, but certainly they're in so-called Francophone Africa, and particularly Russia and the Wagner Group, who early on in the coup, there were rumblings that the Wagner Group was there, that maybe Russia may have been there to supply or to help them with regard to their defense and security needs. It's been reported. And so he, like most of the Western talking heads, are focused on the allies. Now, he only mentions Burkina Faso and Mali, who have recently signed a pact between them, having all three been previously in the G5 Sahel pact, along with Chad and Mauritania. So now they've splintered off, and they are now a collective, and so he's referring to their support militarily. But underneath, it always kind of comes back to whatever their suspicion of with regard to Russia and China. Also, it's just really interesting how they stay on code, and, we'll see what happens. I still am of the belief that France is stalling. They know the heat is on them to remove their troops. And I think them starting so soon after agreeing, it makes sense. And hopefully they do follow through, and it doesn't take the next 3 months for them to fully remove themselves. But we'll see what happens. So that's what's going on. That's my opinion. Let me know what you think. Get down in the comments and let me know what you think. Do you agree? Is it a reasonable approach? Is it a reasonable time frame? Do you think France is stalling? Do you think that the new military government is going to have an increased problem in these areas where they have the biggest problems? Do you think that France and Europe are being the agents of chaos they're known to be? Whatever it is you think, get down in the comments and let me know. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share. And I'll see you in the next video.